Welcome back, everybody. My name is Todd Latham. We're in the home stretch of the Housing Summit 2.0 Progress Report, presented by RESCON and sponsored by the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board and the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Toronto. We've got an interesting closing panel here. We're going to start off with Arash, who's going to give us a quick presentation on where he's at. A recent announcement by the province, I think, is going to be foremine for his presentation. And then after he finishes, we'll have Tony and Richard join in on some conversation, and that's when I think we'll take some questions from the audience. So please do put questions in the chat and we'll answer them after the three of them have wrapped up the conversation. So now, without further ado, Arash Shahi is an entrepreneur and innovator, feels fortunate to have enjoyed a remarkable career that has provided opportunities to make significant achievements in the architectural, engineering, construction, academic, and real estate sectors. So in other words, he's done it all and he's very happy to be here. Over to you, Arash.
Well, thank you very much for the introductions. Thank you, RESCON, for having us and for everybody to attending. Just sharing my screen here. I'm here to talk to you about One Ontario, the next generation development approval system for Canadian municipalities. It's a one window, streamlined and transparent solution. We've got some very exciting news this morning from the federal government about their support of the program. So we'll get to that, but the timing couldn't be better to be with you today and talk to you about what's happening with One Ontario. Just to give you a little background, this initiative started about in 2014 in a collaboration between RESCON and University of Toronto. At the time, I was at U of T, and we established a center with RESCON at U of T on Building Innovation Research Center. And the idea there was to look at a number of different projects within this space, but most important, looking at why does it take so long to get projects approved at our Canadian municipalities. So we did a number of pilots, including the EDAP project. Some of you might be familiar with that. That was a collaboration between RESCON and LMCBO, the large municipalities chief building officials. We got 15 municipalities together, trying to standardize the intake and terminology on projects. Some lessons learned there. Did a number of pilots with individual municipalities, with Toronto, Windsor, Waterloo, and others. And we did some international scans and some other Canadian case studies. In one example, we spent about 4 years looking at all the e-permitting systems internationally, from East Asia to Europe and US, and looking at how do they compare with each other, because e-permitting is a terminology that's used rather loosely in our space. So we put them into three categories of e-permitting based on the level of digitization and complexity. So level 0 is where our entire municipalities were not too long ago, everything on paper, everything manual. Level 1 is where most municipalities are moving towards, and that's where you have paperless, so digital processes, but it's still very manual. Level 2 is a BIM submission. It's a submission of the 3D model to the municipality. And that's where you kind of move from digitization to automation. And level 3, which is a gold standard, is a BIM GIS integration. And a lot of jurisdictions, including Singapore, UK, and other countries in Europe, have kind of moved towards level 2 and 3. And whereas, again, in Ontario and across the country, we are mostly a level 1 digitization when it comes to permitting. So One Ontario is basically the next generation, a level 2, 3 e-permitting system. That, as I said, has just got some federal backing to implement in Ontario as the first province across the country. Looking at all the research that was done by ourselves and others in other universities and other institutions, a recent report came out from Build, everybody talking about the same thing. It's a complicated process. There's a lot of duplication of effort. It's a fragmented, siloed approach to approvals. And there's basically time for change. Now, what happened in 2020, as soon as the pandemic hit, a lot of municipalities who didn't have digital solutions had to shut down. Those who had solutions could stay open. And it was a wake-up call for our government sector and the public sector to basically get on with the times and digitize and streamline going forward. And this is a quote that I really like. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And I think we are in those weeks now. Post-pandemic, what has happened in the public sector digitization space is not comparable to what was done before. So over the next months and a few years, I think we're going to see a lot of transformation in this space. And that was basically the motivation for us to come out of University of Toronto and start AECO Innovation Lab in collaboration with a lot of our industry partners, because the solution, in our view, resides in the intersection of academia, industry, and government. None of those sectors individually can actually solve the problem. And this is perhaps a message to our government, including the provincial government, that if the government alone was going to do it, they would have done it already. So it's important to basically work on a collaborative basis. And I've heard that over and over throughout the sessions today. I'm glad that a lot of people are coming to this realization that at the end of the day, this has to be a collaboration opportunity. And this is basically a simple slide, but showing, in our view, based on all of our research, how different stakeholders in the permitting process view the problem. And it's not an exaggeration. If you actually spend the time with the different groups that are involved, this is not an exaggeration. And that's why, again, another point for why we need collaboration in this space and talking to each other to solve the problem. And with that in mind, that's how we created One Ontario, to bring in, again, those three sectors together and bring all the stakeholders at the table to once and for all solve the issues that are in front of us. Over the last 2.5 years, the One Ontario Coalition has been growing. We are now the largest coalition of stakeholders ever assembled in Canada, looking at development approvals. We have the likes of RESCON, obviously, as one of the founding members. We have building officials, both the large municipalities, chief building officials, and the OBOA. We have the planning community through OPPI. We have Conservation Ontario, individual conservation authorities. The list goes on and on and on. We have the Toronto Real Estate Board and a number of different groups who've basically committed resources and have backed the One Ontario vision for a centralized, streamlined, transparent development approval process in this province. A lot of these groups, to be frank, may not see eye to eye on a number of issues, but what's important is that when it comes to this particular issue, they all agreed what needs to be done. And we are very humbled by the support that we've got, not just from these organizations, about 40 organizations who've supported. They include individual municipalities, including the likes of City of Toronto and Oakville, who've backed this vision. To summarize what the state of the art is in the province of Ontario, we have municipalities who have spent millions of dollars on their digitization efforts, e-permitting systems, and so on. We have regional governments, external agencies, conservation authorities, and all the third parties that might get involved in development approvals, all spent a lot of money and effort in their digitization processes, but none of these systems actually talk to each other. So from an applicant standpoint, you still need to communicate with a number of different portals, a lot of duplication of effort in entering information, a lot of inefficiencies in these agencies communicating with each other. So the question is, how can we solve this problem, and what has the rest of the world done to solve this problem? Because this is not unique to us. And one of the advantages of going last is that there's a lot of examples in front of us that we can learn from and adopt for the Canadian market. So from an overview standpoint, we have a decentralized approach right now, where we have a lot of communication between the applicant and the reviewers and the planners and the examiners and all the other agencies. And we're moving towards a centralized portal, common data environment, where it's a single source of truth where everybody can collaborate on. So that's basically the philosophy behind it. But looking at all the best practices internationally, what other countries have done in ages. So for example, Singapore, the first e-permitting system, level 1, was done in 1995. And that's the digital transformation we're seeing today in some of our municipalities. So we are decades behind in some cases. But the good news is they've done their work. We can learn from them. We can adopt and catch up very quickly. So from a design standpoint, this is what the vision is for One Ontario. We have a single portal in front for development approvals across the province. and it was commented on in some of the other presentations that in other jurisdictions, federal governments and provincial governments take the lead. And that's absolutely true, because there is really no way for us to standardize unless we have a portal in front. We have all the municipalities and regional governments have come up with their own standards, but it's no longer a standard if everybody has their own set of standards. So we are combining those, putting it in front, and providing that single portal for applications. And then that portal connects with the municipalities and the regional governments and all the conservation authorities and everybody else. And that's why those buy-in from those logos are important, because they've committed to connect to the One Ontario Data Exchange standards. So we can, there's no technology question, it's really a will. Do we have the will to do it? And we had the support from the different groups. And as of this morning, we have the funding to actually get it done. So that's the good news that we wanted to share. The funding comes from CMHC. So we presented this problem. We've been talking to provincial government for a number of years already. It's been somewhat slow in coming to the table, but the federal government has come in with funding, and we hope that this is basically a trigger for the provincial government to engage as well and move forward with a solution that works for all municipalities in Ontario. Basically, we've spent a lot of support from the pilot is in Simcoe County. So we have a lot of support from the county itself and all the different groups that play in that space. It's a sample for regional government solutions across the country. So starting with Ontario and then expanding to Canada, we have the support of a number of federal agencies behind this initiative. We've done the process mapping for a number of municipalities within Simcoe and outside of Simcoe, and we are now ready to actually build that into that unified portal solution. This is basically the box. The blue box is what's being developed. Now it's going to be a BIM GIS enabled portal. Canada is the only G20 country that does not have a BIM mandate, national BIM mandate. We have provinces who've moved that way. But we remain as the only G20 country that doesn't have a national BIM mandate. That means, what that means to our municipalities is that it's coming. We are last to the game, but it is coming. And again, that's one of those areas where we can't expect 440 municipalities in Ontario to become BIM enabled overnight. But with having a centralized portal, we can accept BIM centrally and then communicate the information in whatever format that the municipalities can accept into the municipality. Some agencies, some conservation authorities might be more advanced than others, and that's how we can basically filter the information to whoever agencies based on their capabilities. So there's the benefits of this solution. We can talk about this for hours, but streamlining, transparency. If the system is in place, the provincial government can actually view where the bottlenecks are. So it can support a lot of policy that follows. So transparency is perhaps the most important benefit. Obviously, from an applicant standpoint, it also makes life a lot easier. But there's also other advantages to this. We have the Indigenous angle, basically, where there's a duty to consult. And right now, municipalities have a very difficult time in order to be able to communicate with Indigenous communities. So we have a significant Indigenous aspect to this. We're basically making this available to Indigenous communities in Simcoe and beyond. It also can be used for specific policies. So if affordable housing, for example, is a priority, which it should be, with a system like this, you can actually prioritize affordable housing projects so that they have to stay in the same lines as every other project. And now that was one of the topics that was basically addressed in part of our solution. Why now? I think the answer to this is fairly clear. There's a lot of momentum provincially and federally behind solving the housing crisis. And some of those problems reside with our development approval system in this province. So, and that's why now is the right time. We have federal support, we have provincial support, and municipalities are actually more than willing to work together. I think Chris from Toronto hinted to that if there was a system where municipalities can collaborate on and work together, there's definitely appetite. We don't have to reinvent the wheel at every municipality. So this supports that. The One Ontario Coalition is growing now with CMHC at the table, and we are inviting and hoping that the provincial government will also join us and basically be able to roll this out across the entire province in the coming months and few years. So with that, I would like to start my presentation, hand it over to the panel and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Arash. And over to you and Tony and Richard to have a few comments. And obviously this is fresh news, the funding from CMHC. So why don't you guys chat about that, and then we'll get to Q&A from the audience.
Okay, I'll jump in first. I never thought I'd sit in on an industry presentation by RESCON that would quote Lenin, but I kind of love it in a freaky sort of way. I just had to mention that. It's but anyways, kudos to everyone involved in getting this approved and hopefully moving this forward. I first got interested in this subject a long time ago when I saw something in The Economist that said Singapore was licensing its system to the city of Oslo, Norway. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. What are they doing? And then, we got into it, and then we made the engagement with U of T and with Arash's team, and a lot of good work was done, and we've got to this point. And it's absolutely vital. I've a bit of a background academically in public administration, institutional design, and systems analytics. And, process really does define so much. And it's not just frustration, by the way, on the part of the industry with the system. Planners and building officials are frustrated too, because we all have to live with the system, and we can have a much better one. So, I'm really excited, and we're really excited with the promise that this holds. And, but it is hard to sort of herd the cats, as they say, and get everybody lined up on this, but it is so important. And the thing you get from it is you do get accountability, you get transparency, and you get metrics. Like, for example, you get metrics on, how things work and what the flow is and where the problems are. And so then you can identify problems. Good decisions are based on good information. And right now the information is terrible. I mean, look at our growth planning. How badly did they miss on the demographics? Pretty big point, right? But anyways, those are my 2 cents worth. And I know we're excited about other regions coming on board with this. And of course, and I'm in total agreement with the, it kind of reminds me of when the 1975 introduction of the Ontario Building Code, because prior to that happening, every municipality was doing its own thing on how buildings should be built. And it didn't make sense because it was horrible for anyone going from municipality to municipality. So, so what did we do? We created a level playing field, one platform for the building code. We need to do this on this stuff too. So anyways, that's my comment.
I just have one question, just in terms of sort of time that will be sort of saved and cost savings, and do we know from other jurisdictions what that looks like with this kind of a fully sort of digital process? I'm really interested in that, and curious as to what you guys have know about that, or what you think about that.
Well, I'll just jump in and then I'll turn it over to Arash, because we actually did a study on this. But one of the things we looked at too is how many government agencies are involved in the approvals process. And we found that in the more advanced areas, there's actually less agencies because they actually streamline their own systems. We're at 45 by our estimation. If you look at Finland, I believe it was around 16, and Singapore has 12. And then the other thing that we found that was interesting, it really did engender, the predictability in the process actually encouraged more proponents to come forward with ideas. And through the process, right up front, you get a pretty good idea of when you can get a shovel in the ground. And of course, everything in our industry is driven by money. It's investment, and investment is determined by risk. And if you can determine how long it's going to take to get something done with a high degree of accuracy, bingo, you're there. So it's much more efficient. And then, of course, there's AI elements to this in terms of built-in reminders and so on. Like, say, for example, if one of the participants in the group doesn't respond, Well, the system, you can have a system that actually triggers a, hey, where are you and where is this? You don't need actually a human intervention. The
Right.
long part of it is that you end up with people like planners and building officials and the industry. They're doing more interesting work. Like, the thing about delays and having to phone and go wait at a counter or whatever else like that, it drives everybody nuts. So there's benefits there, but the timelines are definitely compressed. Remember that little factoid at the beginning of my opening comments about being 34th out of 35 OECD countries on approvals.
Yeah.
This is part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, Tony, I think there's a few different things that play into it. So from a communication standpoint, a lot of the delays are with communication between different agencies. So this solves that. And from in international best practices, you can see anywhere between 25 to 50% reduction just based on that. But then to Richard's point, then we talk about automation, right? So when a model, when we get into the model submission, when a model comes in, you can actually check the model automatically against the code, against a number of different zoning requirements. So a lot of the work that needs to get done at the municipal level, low level work that nobody enjoys doing, can be automated. And then the application could only be accepted if all of those things are okay. So it's high quality submissions coming in. That was one of the #1 complaints from municipalities, because when you listen to all these different groups, everybody has their own complaints, right? The industry is complaining about other things, and the municipality #1 complaint from municipalities is that we don't have good quality submissions. Well, this solves that, because we can check the quality before we accept that, right? So I think everybody needs to do their part. It's not just municipalities. The developers need to do their part. We have conservation. One of the groups that we're told that is never going to play is conservation authorities. But Conservation Ontario was one of the first groups that actually joined them, because they were saying that we want to get this done, but we're not getting the information we need at the time that we need, right? We get involved so late in the process, and then our process takes a lot of time, and then everybody blames us. So that's why everybody has kind of come together. And I think one thing I wanted to mention was with the CMHC funding that just came out today, we started trying to learn exactly what the details are. But one thing that they made super clear is that CMHC encourages stacking. So even though the original proposal was for the Simcoe County, if the province or individual municipalities want to tack onto that, that's encouraged by CMHC. So we can, this is where action actually happens. We've been talking about it, and there's been a lot of conversations and task force and other things around this, but this is it. We can solve the development approval process if there is a will to do it. So.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to open up to questions now to give Tony some time at the end to wrap up for us. Tony's going to provide the closing remarks. There is a question from the audience that says, please identify learnings from specific projects in the past that informed your proof of concept. So over to you, Arash, on that.
How many hours do I
have? Maybe just pick one.
One of the more interesting stuff was the first project we did with RESCON and EDAP. That was 15 large municipalities that we wanted to standardize the permitting process. After a year and a half, we couldn't even standardize terminology, because one municipality was calling this single detached dwelling, another municipality was calling single family home, and nobody was moving an inch. I'm not calling any particular municipality out, but nobody was moving an inch from their existing system. So one of the things that we used in One Ontario was that we don't need municipalities to change. You keep doing what you're doing. You put a standard in front of it, and we will communicate. As long as we can map our terminology, standard terminology with your terminology, we can start communicating without any, because it's very costly for municipalities to change their systems, right? They've invested millions of dollars, decades into their existing processes. And for them to change a single terminology, it's a lot of work, right? So one of the things that informed our design was that we will map out your terminology and your process to this central approach. And so that from an applicant standpoint, it's very centralized, but when you receive it, you're going to receive it in the language that you understand and your systems are built on. So that was one of the learnings that we had based on one of our studies that we did with RESCON.
I mean, I was going to say just one thing. One other thing we learned, that where advanced systems have been introduced, there is a learning component to it. Like in Singapore, when they first started up, they all of a sudden realized that the industry didn't know how to do it. And so they set up some consulting services for that. You know, in Finland, They actually had teams go into, offices and show them how to work with it. And it wasn't that hard. Like it's pretty intuitive stuff, especially for people already working in those areas. And they also found that the work then subsequently was more rewarding because they were focused on more meaningful issues rather than, putting something from one stack onto another stack.
And it can attract better talent, talent retention, attracting new generation of workers into our municipality. That's been a challenge. We have a solar tsunami going on. The new generation, if you bring them in and give them 2,000-page building code and say, go ahead and flip through it, they're not going to last very long, right? So we need to reform how we do things if we want to attract the top talent, the young talent that we need in our public sector. There's really no reason why the top talent in this country shouldn't be going to the public sector. But the public sector needs to put the infrastructure in place, because this is the generation that grew up on iPads and game environments, right? They can navigate a 3D model with their eyes closed. So let's take advantage of that by equipping them with the technology that they need to actually do that.
There's another question. And it says, it looks to me like you are adding a layer. Filling in the form is the smallest part of the problem.
Yeah, so it is adding a layer. It's an integration layer that's being added on top. So we are protecting the investments everybody has made in their systems. We're not replacing any systems. This is a system on top of existing systems purely as an integration layer. Filling out the forms automatically is the least that the system can do. The best advantage of it is the transparency and visibility into the process, and getting information to who needs that information as soon as possible. That's how we'll cut the application review process, right? It's getting the information, and this is going to be an intelligent layer. So we are working with Esri and our other partners. All the GIS layers are going to be combined. We can actually do a lot of the diagnosis that they have to do at the regional government or conservation authority upfront. So when you want to pick a parcel of land, you'll know right off the bat who's the actual authority on that parcel. Depending on what you want to do, who needs to be informed. All that information will be available to the applicant right off the bat, regardless of the municipality they're actually applying to.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into the next question, which is development review at its best involves reviewers providing clear, reasonable, and internally consistent to-do lists for applicants that outline the pathway to approval. Is this system for storing application submission documents, or is it for commenting and enabling coordination between municipal and other reviewers to refine those lists?
So a lot of the work that's being done at the municipal level will continue to be done at the municipal level, right? This is a layer on top of municipality for collaboration between the applicant, municipality, and all the 40 agencies that might get involved with an application. So we're not entering the municipal systems. They have EPIM. There's good products on the market, probably half a dozen products that are pretty modern, and there's good technology available. We are starting to get buy-in from different e-permitting providers to connect to the portal. So it's not an added cost or added work for municipalities, but from an applicant standpoint, this is basically a collaboration mechanism that can, we call it next generation, because a lot of the processes will have to change, right? But from a philosophical standpoint, right now, municipalities, the building department, for example, are enforcing the building code, right? So they're basically checking the design against the building code. Well, what if we can make the applicant kind of explain how they comply with the building code? So you just verify. There's some nuances. And the good news here, and I think this is a very important point, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of skepticism around this. Then this is the most important point. It's been done before. It's been done before over and over and over again. Nothing that we're proposing is earth-shattering. Unfortunately, none of it is new technology. This is things that have been developed for decades and have been implemented in other jurisdictions for years. So we just need the will of the government to actually get this done. There is zero technology risk, and I mean that because there's a lot of examples of it already implemented in other jurisdictions.
Well, that's actually the last question that I have here before we turn it over to Tony for closing remarks is, when do you expect to have the test portal with Simcoe County up and running?
The timeline for Simcoe was an 18-month project, so that's the deadline for it. But over the last several months, as we were anticipating this announcement, we've actually got a lot of technology providers that have come together and to help us do this. And we think that as early next year, we're going to have a pilot of the portal up and running that Simcoe and other jurisdictions could be added on. Now, keep in mind, the first generation of the portal will be best in class from an Ontario perspective, but our vision is to become a global leader in this space, and that's probably going to take us about 2 to 3 years. But from a first generation standpoint, early next year, we expect to have a pilot up and running.
Thank you, Arash. Richard, any final comments from you before I hand over the floor to Tony?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that presentation. There's links and you can watch this recording. Obviously, you can get in touch with Arash and Richard via the portal, and you always know where to reach them via email. I'm going to turn things over to Tony. Tony is the president and CEO of Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. With 2,200 members, FRPO is a leading advocate for quality rental housing in Ontario. And Tony has been taking notes all day on what was good and what he learned, and he's going to summarize things for us, and then I'll just come back at the end to wrap things up and say goodbye.
Thank you, Todd. I will try to go quickly. I know we're right near the end here. So first of all, FRPO is pleased to be a sponsor of today's summit. We'd like to thank Richard and everyone at RESCON for bringing us together for this very important conversation. Todd, of course, gave a little bit of an idea of who FRPO is and what we do. Ontario's leading advocate for quality rental housing in the province. We all know tackling housing supply is one of the biggest challenges facing policymakers at all levels of government in Canada today. We are glad to see Minister Clark today and hear about the work the provincial government has been doing and learn what may be coming down over the next little while, the next housing bills, which we know are coming. So it was great to have him with us. Certainly want to thank Jason Mercer and Todd Siakopoulos from TREB and CMHC for sharing their market insights. Many of us have opportunities to hear both of them periodically do that. They give excellent presentations. And I think we all agree any good policy exercise must be driven by data, and we appreciate their contributions to today's conversation. On the rental side, FRPO has worked with Urban Nation to track progress on supply on an ongoing basis. Our most recent study concludes that over 300,000 rental units are needed on top of the current pipeline to address the supply gap over the next 10 years. This in a context where there's been very little new supply, as we know, built in decades. However, this has been changing, as we've heard some today, that due to measures of this government, personal rental construction starts doubled over the past 5 years, reaching over 13,500 starts last year. However, although that is good news, we still need an additional 30,000 rental units a year to meet the anticipated shortage over the next decade. Today's conversation, or today's summit, also features some excellent panel conversations on reforms needed to increase supply. Thank you to Amina Deeb from RESCON, Eric Lombardi from More Neighbors Toronto, Mike Moffat from Smart Prosperity Institute, and Chris Hornberg from Concept to Keys for their contributions. A great conversation that they all had, talking about different reforms that will really take things forward. FRPO has also been advocating for reforms, some of which were talked about today: an as-of-right zoning framework, density incentives, a provincial triage service led by a rental housing facilitator, financial incentives for mid-market rentals, and income supports for tenants, and measures to address skilled labor shortages, which we know is a huge issue and was talked about today as well. We'd also like to thank Michael Giles, David Amborski, Ian Underwood, and Ben Dacus for stressing the need for affordable and rental housing. They had a great conversation too. Finally, we of course had this panel that's just concluded. A great conversation, excellent pilot program underway. Digital process is critical for approvals. We know the challenges, and so it's great to hear about that too. So with that, I want to conclude my sort of closing comments. I know Todd's got a few last things to say, but we know there's more work to be done. The 3 C's, coordination, collaboration, and cooperation, are critical. We all continue to work together. Thank you so much for including us today at FRPO, and Todd, over to you. Hope I got through in the right amount of time.
Perfect. Wow, you're a pro at this. Thank you very much, Tony, Arash, and Richard for that conversation. Very timely. Obviously, they got the money just this morning, and further things happening I just wanted to say thank you to all the sponsors, including Tony and Treb, and especially to RESCON and staff for putting this conversation forward. We're going to keep the conversation going. This platform will remain open for another 90 days. So you can just go onto the app and watch the programs again, link to the people who are speaking, link to the sponsors, link to any of the content that's on the site. It'll be there for 90 days. And leave us your comments there, send the comments into RESCON. We're going to be doing this again. We're going to do a 3.0 in the spring of 2023. Might be on this platform, might be in person, might be both. But appreciate your feedback on what you would like to see in the spring of 2023. And that's when we'll be understanding a little bit more about what the municipalities are doing after the election in October coming up. So make sure you vote, make sure you build more housing, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.